when to put line work in your illustration. So I did a video a little while back talking about line work in general, kind of going over the whole concept of, do lines even exist in real life? And the spoiler right at the beginning of the video was no, lines don't actually exist. So when you look at things in the real world, you might see things that look like lines, but the reality is they're not lines, they're just really long shapes. In the case of this here, it looks like it's a dark line, but really it's just a deep shadow, really tight shadow, separating the collar from the neck here on Princess Leia. Of course, it is this abstract idea where when we draw lines around things, we see the separation, and that just kind of makes us understand what it is. You see things like blueprints, and it's just line work everywhere, but we kind of see the shapes and we understand what it is. So the question that you may be wondering, and that I want to touch on today, is when do we add in line work? Like this piece right here, this is actually mostly a digital piece that I did for The Mandalorian. And when you look closely, you see these like purple lines right here on the side here, and in between there. And in general, a lot of times in my work, not always, but a lot of times you will see outlines. And sometimes you'll just see like a black outline around some of the subjects or characters. Sometimes you'll see, again, you might see not only a black outline, but you might see, in the case here, here's this lilac color, and there's just kind of this weird line work that's just kind of roughed in. You can also see it on Shin Hati. You can kind of see those red lines in addition to the dark outline. There's another one. Why am I doing that? And when do you want to do it? When do you not want to do it? Well, first of all, the official answer of when do you want to do line work, when do you not want to do line work, for the most part, it is up to you on what you want to do. It's your art, right? Although sometimes you may have a job where they may have a preference on how they want the style to be if you don't have like a signature style and like that's the only thing that you do. So let me give you an example of what happened to me on a particular gig and how I had to solve things, when to use line work, when to not use line art. So most people know me for my painted style. That's it's kind of a Drew Struzan-ish technique, but really it harkens back to all of the classic movie poster illustrators. It's just kind of this really cool, dynamic, larger than life style that has realism, but it also has kind of this fun line work, bringing it back to illustration where it's a painting, but there's something about it where it feels drawn. Sometimes I do work that doesn't have the fun line work, like this Princess Leia doesn't really have the crazy outlines that I usually do. I just felt for this piece it was nice, showing Princess Leia young and innocent, and I didn't want to rough it up with all this crazy line work like you kind of see in Shin Hati here, where she's kind of been broken down by battle and starting to become jaded. So I want to talk about this project that I did a couple years back, actually a couple projects for 2 trading card sets called Star Wars Illustrated. And what this was the retelling visually of Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back, but it was through the radio dramas from back in the day. And it was interesting because there were all of these added scenes, some of them that were meant to be in the movie, and then some that were just added for dramatic effect in these cool radio shows. So when illustrating these cards, what the client wanted, in this case, the client was Topps and Lucasfilm, they wanted a style that was a little bit more comic book illustration. Now, if I had my way, I would have illustrated this way. This is kind of my, this is a little bit closer to my signature style. I like painting things. It takes a little bit more time, but I like to render things out. I like things to look a little bit more just realistic. You know, with the ships, it still has a little bit of a cartoony look to it, but in general, I don't know. I like having that, a slight sense of realism. Not that this isn't cool. This is bold and it's pop art, right? It's kind of comic book like. So this was what they wanted. They wanted to have kind of a dynamic comic book kind of style. So this is how I illustrated all of the cards, and I think I did like 40-ish cards for A New Hope, and then I did, I want to say, like close to 60 cards for The Empire Strikes Back. However, Star Wars Insider magazine wanted to have an exclusive card that wasn't actually part of the set, kind of promoting it. So when I was hired to do that, they said I could use any style I wanted. So in illustrating this scene here, where Garandin the Kubaz, one of my favorite characters when I was a kid, here he is informing the stormtroopers where to find those pesky rebels, and that they're on Docking Bay 94. So this is something you assume happens, but you don't actually see it in the film. So when doing this, I got to illustrate it in more of a painterly style. Now, you might be saying, okay, well, wait a minute, this is painted. Man, if I'm not mistaken, I see line work going around these characters. That is true. So here's what happened on this. Initially, I wanted to move away as much as I could from this line work. After illustrating 40 cards in this style, I wanted to do something a little bit more painterly that just doesn't have the lines going all over the place. So here's what happened. As I started illustrating this, you can kind of see in the background, you can kind of see with this ATST walker, sometimes they call them chicken walkers. And when you look at the details in the background, it doesn't have the heavy line work in the background, yet you see it in the foreground. So here's what was happening as I was illustrating it. I wanted it to have all this really cool depth with foreground, middle ground, and background. Foreground being this stormtrooper right here, super close. We're looking, this is what's called an OTS shot, which stands for over the shoulder. Then you've got this trooper and Garandin the Kubaz in the middle ground, and then everything else is kind of in the background. Well, because there was so much depth here, and just the way everything was laid out, the way the contrast was working, everything was looking a little bit more flat than I wanted it to look. So in that case, what I needed to do to kind of give it a little bit more depth to understand that foreground, middle ground, background, I had to then rely on this awesome technique where when we outline things, it separates things, right? Unmistakably separates things, because here everything is white. It's the white of the paper, and the line work is what separates everything, since we don't have colors and tones. So I needed a little help on this, and I think I'm so glad I did it, because I think it helped it out quite a bit. I don't always think that, like, man, you really need to put line work in your illustration, but in this case, everything was looking flat. So what I did is I left the background kind of as is, where you see a little bit of outlining. That's really just the initial sketch happening, where it's the pencils underneath and transparent paint on top. Also a little bit of color pencil line work in there. Then what I did for the middle ground characters here, this Sand Trooper and Garandin the Kubaz, I outlined them with just black. I didn't want to go crazy with the color pencils, and I didn't want to do the usual movie poster thing that I do, where it's like, here you see the yellow, here you see the, find a better example here, you kind of see the lilac separating everything. I didn't want to go crazy with color because I really wanted this just to feel like a scene, but I went with a relatively dark outline. But then to really sell this sand trooper in the foreground here, looking over the shoulder, I had to go really bold. And man, look how thick that line is around this stormtrooper in the foreground. That is a really thick line, but notice how there's something about it. It just separates that trooper from these two in the foreground here. One of the things that was happening is, you know, when you're doing an illustration, you have to not just look at it like what you see, because obviously I've loved Star Wars since it came out when I was 4 years old as a kid. So I've been a super fan ever since. So I look at this and I know exactly what this is. I know this is a sand trooper. I know this is the back of the sand trooper. I know this is part of the backpack. I even know what this is called. It's called a shoulder pauldron. This orange thing on the side here. So the thing was, though, is sometimes when you're illustrating something, you have to illustrate it in a way where, what if someone wasn't a super fan of Star Wars and they saw this? Would they understand it? Would they understand that this is a stormtrooper here? That's pretty, I mean, you can kind of tell, even if you don't know Star Wars, you can kind of tell. Obviously, that's a figure standing there, some kind of trooper that has this armor. But what is this? If you didn't know this, or if you hadn't seen a lot of sand troopers, you might be wondering, is this like crazy apparatus, or is this a vehicle that this trooper is coming out of and they kind of have similar armor? Is this like a big machine over here? You might not know what this is, and it might not make sense. So I just started looking at it that way, and I started thinking, man, are people even going to understand this looking over the shoulder? And I know you look at it now and you're like, how would people not get that? Well, I don't know. There was something about it that just wasn't working, and I thought it was a little awkward. But I'll tell you what, after adding the nice outline to the middle ground characters and then the beefy outline to the sand trooper in the foreground looking over the shoulder, it just sold it, and I think it just brought it together really, really nicely. Plus, you have to understand, this is on a trading card, so this was going to be super, super small. Would you be able to see it from far away and understand all that you are looking at? So that was a really good lesson for me that worked out well. Real quick, I want to talk about, okay, so with this idea of outlining, now what you might be wondering is, why would you put extra color outlining? Why would you do something like this, where you're putting these outlines here? See these red outlines with all this funky, like even on the side of the nose here? And if you look all around the character, why do I have this red outline? Well, there's something about a double outline with color that I've seen. Obviously, Drew Struzan does this quite a bit. If you're familiar with his work, a lot of movie poster artists do this. And there's a couple reasons why. For one, you know, for a normal scene like this, it's kind of unnecessary. But when you have something like a poster montage, a lot of times it's a bunch of heads or characters, and you want to separate them. You want everything to be kind of like this unity montage of everything coming together. But at the same time, when it comes down to it and you are kind of seeing all these characters, sometimes you need to separate. You can see here, you see this line separating Mando from, oh my gosh, I forgot her name, the forger, the gatekeeper. Oh my gosh, I'm so bad. How did I forget her name? Someone in the comments has to let me know what her name is and scold me for not remembering in the moment. But I'm thinking artwork right now. I'm not thinking Star Wars. Okay, so if you look closely, again, you'll see hard line, and you'll even see that lilac line. And it's doing two things. One, it's giving a really good separation between Mando and the forger. I forget her name. I feel so bad. Someone has to scold me really bad for this. Okay. The other thing that it does when you have this double outline, it actually, in a weird way, it kind of blurs things. So you have the separation like you would by outlining something with black, but then the fact that you outline it again with color, it almost does this thing where it looks like a rim light, but it also kind of blurs it a little bit. And it makes it, and I know it sounds like, man, you're really emphasizing the edges and it's making it even more bold. But the fact that you do it with a color, it kind of blurs it out and makes it not so obvious that you just took this dark outline. It kind of takes away from it. In the case of this Shin Hati piece, I wanted to have this really cool, almost like lasery, fiery circle, like design elements in the background. You kind of see a lot of this fun stuff in the Ahsoka show, from the ancient Jedi ruins and the Witches of Dathomir and all the fun things. So I thought red would be cool because it's almost adding a rim light of these lasery shapes kind of glowing around the shape of the head in the background. And is it exactly what you would see in real life? No, that's not the way rim lighting would actually work, but it's a nice design element, and it's kind of bringing the foreground with the background, and it's a cheat, but it works. Kind of meshes it together, and it also gives some added texture. It's just more detail to look at it, and from far away you don't really notice those details. Your eyes just kind of take it all in. So that is the skinny. So I wanted to kind of share. This is only line work. This is line work with color, and there's actually a little bit of painting on top too. There's a little bit of rendering, for example, in Han's sleeve. This is a painting with no line work. This is a painting with line work, but not like the extra pizzazz, you know, with the scrape, 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 and the, you know, the color outline pizzazz. And then this is all the things, sometimes even using line work to suggest details and tattered battle action clothing. So, in short, when and where to use it. If you're doing your own art, man, there are no rules. You can do it up however you see fit and make it awesome and find your own balance of rendering, shading, and line art. Then again, when you get a gig, they may have a preference. They may have a certain style that they want you to stick with. In that case, you have to do what the doctor ordered. And the client is always right. So keep that in mind. All right, with that, me and Grogu are out of here. Grogu, do you want some combos? I'm feeling combos right now. Does that sound good? That does sound good. Okay, we'll see you guys next week.